Yo, I don't mean to fanboy, but this thing is kind of nice. This is the DaranEner Neo something 2000. Let me see what this is. God dog it. All right, it's just the Neo 2000. I don't know how I had that brain fart. I know why. This is the DaranEner. I call it the Duran. It will forever and affectionately be called the Duran. This thing has some interesting features, a couple drawbacks, and one thing that I really want to get into, but I think it's very interesting, and the logic seems sound. So quick deviation. I'm gonna leave this clip in there for as long as the coupon code is active, but the coupon code that they gave me in conjunction with the current like coupon you can clip on Amazon brings this thing down to about $1,150. Don't quote me on that because that's where it's at right now. I don't know how long it's gonna stay there, but I'm gonna leave this clip in the video until the coupon code has expired, which is supposed to be for a long time. I think that kind of bumps up all of these specs just a little bit because it's close to $1,000. I think that's dope. All right, back to the video. How nice looking is this device? I don't mean to go shallow at the onset, but when I first came across this, I was like, man, that's a cool looking power station. All of the ports are on the front of this device. That's kind of, for me, 616, what is the saying? Y'all get it. 6 one way, half a dozen the other. I like the fact that it has all of the ports on the front, but I do like some power stations that has a port on the side or that has a port on the back. It just depends on where it's going to go in my house. I have zones, and this thing will fit into different zones just depending on how it works out. It has all of the standard stuff, 2,000 watt hours, 2,000 watt inverter, can charge multiple devices at the same time. It has pass-through charging. It has a UPS. We're going to talk about that later. It has wireless charging on the top, one wireless pad, 5, 7, 10 watts, I believe is the max. It has 2 100 watt USB ports, 4 USB 3.0 charging ports, or whatever you want to call those things, the fast charging ones, right? It has your 12 volt socket. It has 4 55 21 sockets on it. I don't know why 4, that's a lot, but hey. And then all of the charging things are on the front, as you can see here. It has a non-power brick charging thing. You just have the cable that comes with it, and then it charges over XT60, which I think is fantastic. It does have a diffused light on the back. That is the only thing that's on the back of the device. Here is the light. You press and hold it, you get that. It's blinking because of the camera. The camera has to kind of catch up. Now it's actually blinking. SOS off. Just to get into the design elements a little bit, it has this little gradient all over the device. It's very cool looking, but I think dust is gonna be an issue. I'm mindful of stuff like that because I'm not neurotic about it. I don't know if that's the right word, but I'm just mindful of crevices. They have these covers on here. I think I saw Minuteman Prep. He was talking about something else, and he actually liked the covers. I don't know how I feel about covers. I'm not the biggest fan of it, even though I have a relatively dusty house. But here's an interesting thing about these covers. They are all downward. Like, what is that about? I'm personally not a fan of that for one reason. Mainly, I'm not used to it. The second reason, practicality. When you put a wire in here, these plugs, these covers are very stiff, so they buck up against the wire. The XT60 being down here at the bottom, that's a bit of a problem. They do give you a beefy kind of XT60. Let me just show you. This is their XT60 connector. I was using a different XT60 connector. It was one of the little 4-ways. And it didn't have any reinforcement here. It was just kind of a wire. It's a cheaper cable because they put so much into one of the cables. So this particular plug, you can see it now. It's even like rebounding back up. It would push up against the wire. I'm not a fan of that. You don't have as much issues with the AC, but I imagine, let me put this into perspective. I'm an 80s kid. I hate getting shorts in my wires. So I have not gotten shorts and cables in a very long time. It happens every now and then, but that concerns me. It may not concern you. I wish I could easily pull them out, but I don't know if I'm going to endeavor to do that. Another thing that really impressed me with this device, guys, I've gotten into over the time that I've been owning these power stations, is how much fan noise does it produce. Is it a relatively quiet power station when charging and when discharging slightly larger loads? I have not put 2,000 watts of a load on this device yet, but I have put like about 900 when using my vacuum cleaner. This thing, when it's charging, from 0 to 100%, fan is super quiet. I'm gonna try and put some footage right here so you could check it out. Here is a sampling of the fan noise. See, the charge weight is 1200 watts. It is so quiet compared to some of my other power stations that I entertain putting this into my front zone. It's not as useful for me in my front zone because it has that higher voltage. I'd have to use my Renogy 320 watt panel, and my front yard panel is a panel that I move back and forth at least once a day. So that's not ideal for me to have a Renogy 300 watt. But I could just get a 24 volt panel, but then that brings up some challenges in compatibility with other power stations. Even though if I had this monster up in zone 1, I wouldn't need any other power stations in that zone, but that's a whole thing. Super quiet. I was like, wow. I was really blown away at how quiet it was. Now, I don't know if the fan is going to have problems over time. I definitely use all my power stations. If you're not new here, you know that. So I will keep an eye on it, and I'll keep you guys updated as it relates to the progress of using this power station. Now, there is something we have to talk about with the user interface. As fancy as this device looks, it's really simple. For better or worse, it only has 2 power buttons. Power button to turn on the AC, power button to turn on the DC. That's it. So everything that's DC is on when everything is on. The wireless charging is on. Actually, Hobotech made a good point about another power station where he was saying because everything is linked, you have to be mindful of what you sit on top of here, because I guess wireless charging emits some type of whatever that could have a problem with some devices. I think he talked about magnetism, and maybe putting your computer on top is not a good idea. So that's something to keep in mind. But only 2 buttons. I found that to be very interesting. Again, not a pro or a con. It's just, you only got 2 buttons. It charges from the wall very swiftly and also quietly. And it can charge in about an hour and like 1.8 hours, they say. So almost 2 hours, you can get a full power station. That's clutch. You guys who've been following power stations, you know how nice it is to have a power station fast charge, because if something is on the horizon, you plug it in, you're getting power very quickly. It is a LFP battery chemistry. Most of the power stations that are coming out these days are. They are one of the few companies that tell you this, but this thing is rated to 80% like most power stations, 3,500 cycles. But they also mention that after about 6,500 cycles or 6,800 cycles, you drop down to 50% capacity. I always thought it was interesting that we always talk about these things in relation to, okay, you get 80% after 3,000 charge cycles. But I've seen batteries degrade more than 80%. So it's interesting that they touched on that. I appreciate that. Kind of kudos to them for enlightening me. I didn't know necessarily the numbers that will go into play as it relates to this dropping down and having half the capacity at 6,500 cycles. Now, 3,500 cycles is roughly 10 years if you cycle it every day. So, you kind of take that in consideration. You have this thing for a long time. God willing, when you get to about 6,000 cycles, it'll see a lot lower degradation in the battery capacity that you have to use in this particular joint. It is a pure sine wave inverter, obviously. I feel like I shouldn't have to say that for how much this thing costs. It's on par with other power stations. Now, the electricity coming out of it, the voltage is 110 and not 120. I can't say that I was disappointed by that, because 110 is fine, but I like seeing 120 on a power station, but this one is not. You have how that plays out and how you power things. Like say when you're vacuuming, you may find that it sounds like the motor is spinning a little bit slower. Now, this is not the same as how you're impacted by a modified sine wave, because that's an ugly, blockier power source. The voltage is just a little lower than what you could see. Now, to put that in perspective, it's 110. Sometimes you can live somewhere where your voltage is like 119. You could live somewhere where your voltage is 115. I don't know if it varies throughout the day, how much voltage you get off of a particular outlet in your house. I just want to put that into perspective, that we don't always get 120 from the wall outlet. Sometimes we get a little less. This one provides a little bit less. Not a big deal. A lot of our power stations use 110. Some of them use 120. So this device does have like a hibernation mode, or what we may commonly know as an eco mode. It is on by default. The good thing is you can turn it off. But so what happens is if you don't turn it off, the DC ports that are on After 3 minutes of no load or a load of 200 milliamp hours or less, so think like you're charging like a Bluetooth headset or something like that, or a Bluetooth receiver, you know, something small, tiny, that doesn't use a lot of power. If you're charging that for 3 minutes and you have such a low thing, the DC will turn off. It also says that the AC will turn off if there's no load on it for 8 hours. But you can turn it off by pressing the DC button and the LED button on the back, pressing and holding them at the same time when the device is on. So you have the option to turn it off. I think that's pretty cool. We talked about the MC4 cable earlier. It is not a 12 volt capable charging device. So it doesn't come with one of those adapters. It comes with the MC4 to XT60 cable. Puts the solar cable in the box. That's always good. And it comes with a let me just go get it. It comes with a beefy AC wall charging cable. Now, in the spirit of transparency, I'm not 100% sure that this is the cable. I think this is, because I don't remember opening up anything else and it having as beefier cable as this one. But it's just an AC computer cable. I don't think you can use just any old cable with it, but don't quote me on that. I don't know what these cables are rated for. So use your cable that came with it if you get one. This can be charged dual. It can be dual charged. It can be charged from solar and AC at the same time. The screen is very nice. It tells you what's going on. It tells you things like time remaining, whether eco mode or hibernation mode is on. It tells you the output. It tells you what's coming in. So it's a solid device. You know, nothing to complain about there. Let's talk about the voltage range, because that's one of the things that I wasn't really a fan of, but I have a particular spin on it. It goes from, let's say about 12, no, actually, my bad. It cannot take a single solar panel. So you need to have something in series, or you have to have something that is in a higher voltage or a 24 volt panel. That sucks. We're used to that from some other power stations, but it's not the best look. But in the grand scheme of things, just to kind of put things into perspective, how many of us are going to start out with a big power station like this and use a 100-watt panel? I don't think that's realistic. We may find ourselves in that situation where it will be nice to put a 100-watt panel on it. Actually, there's another downside to that, because even if you have a big 200-watt panel that's 12 volt, it won't work on this. So that sucks too. God dang it. A little more on the solar charging. It's rated at 33 volts to 60 volts. And get this, it's supposed to be up to 20 amps per the instruction booklet. Now, here's the interesting thing about that, right? 60 volts is not my favorite voltage on a power station, but it does give you more space than you need for most solar panels. That's the kind of thing that I like about the 60 volt range, because it could have been 50 volts, which would kind of be a little bit too on the nose for like a 22 volt panel. Both of those in series. Sometimes you can get higher voltage if it's cold enough out. I don't know how much higher, but 60 volts, it's okay. It doesn't drive me crazy, but it gets the job done. But that 20 amps is very interesting, because what that essentially means is you could put two big panels in parallel. Let's say you had two 250, 40 volt panels. You could put two of those panels in parallel, have the benefit of parallel, which is that the panels don't operate as one large panel. So you could have one, if one gets shade on it, the other one will still produce power. You get your properly rated gauge of cable to go into the solar input. And being able to take in the full 20 amps is a good look. I think that that's dope. Whereas you have some other power stations, they may max out at like 15 amps. And I get it, because the higher you go in amperage, the more like gauge cable you need, the more kind of heat you could produce. I'm not an expert. I'm learning about that. But to be able to use the full 20 amps of two 10 amp panels in parallel is a good look. Now, the most interesting feature that this thing has is the UPS function, the uninterruptible power supply. So what that means is you plug this thing into the wall, you plug your devices into here, the battery gets charged, it outputs the power to this, but if you lose power from the AC, it switches over to the battery power and starts powering your load from the battery inside. That's what UPS is. This particular one says that it has a faster than 20 millisecond turnover time. In the documentation, I've seen 15 seconds. That particular stuff doesn't matter to me. I don't care about that. I don't know what somebody would have in their home that they would need a very quick turnaround time for the UPS to turn. I guess if you were running like some servers or something like that, the typical example that we see is computers. I don't know what else you would need to power and have it transfer over very quickly. For better or worse, what I have found is that this device, when plugged into the wall, and I'll give you some logic in a second, when plugged into the wall, the AC outlets turn on by default. You cannot turn them off. Well, you could turn them off. They're just going to turn back on. Now, Setite had a question. Does the AC turn off when you unplug it? Which would make no sense, but you know, you have to check for stuff like that. So if we unplug this here, the AC stays on. So that is cool. Now, another thing that I noticed with the UPS is because these are live, they're actually producing power, and it's 45 watts coming out at this receptacle, which is wild in my mind. Now, I don't know much about how these devices use and process power when they're in the UPS mode, how much power is actually being used by the inverter because it's on and all that jazz. Let me give you the bright side of this. You have a situation where, let's say you're away from home, you lose power. This runs your stuff for however long it can run your stuff, and then it dies. And let's say maybe 2 hours later, your power comes on. Let's say an hour later, your power comes on. Whenever your power comes back on, this is plugged into the wall in UPS mode, you can have the assurance that this AC will turn back on. So if you have this in an off-grid situation or a remote situation where you have maybe your internet plugged into this would keep your internet running as long as it can. And then if it does die, your internet's out, you can't view your cameras anymore and all that jazz. But when power comes back on, this is going to start charging and that AC is going to turn right back on. I think that that's a really dope feature because a lot of power stations, when they turn off, even if they start getting power again and they turn back on, nothing comes back on. So it's useless to you. So it burns 45 watts. But it comes back on. You kind of have to weigh that. So outside of the blatant benefits of just having a power station this big, you know, the 2,000 some odd watt hour capacity, the 2,000 watt inverter, you know, the ability to charge, you know, multiple devices, 13 or something like that. Having the 5521 ports on there, having XT60, which is a very common solar port. So you get some kind of universality there. The real kicker is this will be useful for people who have a situation where they want to use this as a UPS and kind of take a little piece with the fact that if you lose power, this will power your stuff for as long as it can. But when that power comes back on, your AC comes back on. It'll cost you about 45 watts while that thing is running. But if it's plugged into the wall, it's like at the end of the day, who cares, right? Electricity is relatively cheap compared to other means of providing power. And the whole point of the UPS, if you're going to use it for that, is peace of mind. It cannot do anything like that from solar, by the way. Oh, one thing I did forget. This device is not a big deal. It's not a big deal at all, literally. You have some devices, when they don't have enough voltage coming into the device, they'll start beeping, they'll flash the screen. This one also does that. So if you happen to get this and the screen starts flashing, it happened to me. I wasn't sure what the heck was going on. Like, is it about to die? It still had 20, 30% left. I'm like, what is happening here? But it's when the voltage is too low, the screen kind of blinks. It happens typically in the morning and in the evening when the sun is going down. So that's another interesting thing. I also do want to share about the weight. It's a little on the heavy side, but they're all heavy. This one is about 56, 57 pounds. I haven't weighed it. I'm going off of the documentation. I can't weigh it. My scale is just not equipped for that because it has all of these ridges and it has no way to lay it flat on the scale itself without touching the floor. So I can't really weigh it. I could think of something, but you know, they say it weighs 57 pounds. Maybe it's a little bit heavy, but I feel it when I'm picking it up. That's for sure. What do you guys think about the UPS function on here? And it's very simple 2-button interface for most of the controls. Let me know what y'all think down in the comments.